Morning. Honorable Mr. T. Ravisankar, Deputy Governor of Reserve Bank of India and our distinguished chief guest, Mr. Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, State Bank of India and our distinguished guest of honor, Mr. Rajay Kumar Sinha, Chief General Manager, Global Markets at State Bank of India and Chairman, Foreign Exchange Dealers Association of India, FEDAI, Mr. Madhur Agarwal, Managing Director, JP Chase, Morgan Chase Bank, NA, and Vice Chairman, FEDAI, Mr. Prasanna Balachandar, Head Global Market Sales, Trading and Research at ICICI Bank, and Additional Vice Chairman, FEDAI, Mr. Ashwini Sindwani, Chief Executive, FEDAI, distinguished speakers and panelists for the day from India and overseas, our erudite audience comprising constituent members, senior members of Reserve Bank and banks, and various business groups, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings of the auspicious week of Dasera, and a very good morning to each one of you. I hope you and your family continue to remain safe and healthy. I'm your host, Devi Shankar, and I cordially welcome you to the 5th FEDAI Annual Day via virtual mode. Thank you indeed for sparing your valuable time to attend this prestigious and most sought-after annual convention for its constituent members for 5 straight years in a row, ladies and gentlemen. Friends, the theme of the 2021 annual day is aptly titled India Integrating with the Global Markets. It fills the heart of the organizers with delight to see a convergence of scores of fellow and like-minded professionals here today on this virtual platform. And this is nothing but a strong indication of your quest for knowledge and networking. We at FEDAI do believe that these are required in equal measure to stay competitive and dynamic in this ever-evolving world of business and finance. Dear members, let peace and happiness prevail. As we look back on the challenging and tough 18 months or so that went by, we offer our sincere gratitude to our government and various bodies and agencies, the medical fraternity, financial services community, and all our frontline warriors who served as the backbone of our economy and our very survival. So thank you very much. The FEDAI Annual Day, the 5th annual run that we have organized today, is a niche forum where members can come together to share, discuss, and listen to eminent personalities on topics pertinent to the current state of markets and our economy in specific. With its inception in 2016, this event has had a long and colorful journey and has witnessed participation from very senior bankers, financial institutions, and other industrial bodies. Rich content and intense deliberations have been the key factors of each of our annual conventions. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Let us all stand in unison, ladies and gentlemen, contribute with renewed faith and humility, and work towards our goals and aspirations while promoting nation building at every step of this wonderful journey of ours. To begin today's August proceedings, I request our distinguished chief guest, Honorable Mr. T. Ravisankar, Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and our guest of honor, Mr. Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, State Bank of India, to symbolically light the virtual lamp, invoke the blessings of the Lord, and declare the 2021 FEDAI Annual Day open. I also call upon Chairman, Deputy Chairman, and Additional Vice Chairman of FEDAI to join our chief guest in doing the honors. Can we have the traditional lamp, please?
शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरु त्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for lighting the traditional lamp from darkness unto light. Let the lamp guide us towards more knowledge, wisdom, and well-being for all of us. And coincidentally, today is Saraswati Puja. We couldn't have had a better day to initiate this program, sir. Thank you very much. I now request Mr. Rajay Kumar Sinha, Chairman FEDI, to offer his welcome address. Over to Chairman, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dev. Respected Sri T. Ravi Shankar, Deputy Governor, Reserve Bank of India, and our chief guest for the annual day, Sri Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, State Bank of India, and our guest of honor, Sri Ashwini Sindhavani, CEO of FEDI, Mr. Prasanna, Mr. Madhur, Mr. Jaina, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you all. As markets activity is returning back to pre-COVID level in guided and cautious manner, FEDI as an industry body continues to play the role of facilitating and intermediating between market participants and regulatory bodies, ensuring uninterrupted communication, flow of information, and exchange of views. FEDI, during its 65 years of existence, has made immense contribution towards growth and development of forex markets. FEDI's role has grown and become more dynamic as the markets evolve with introduction of new products, the shift from rule-based to principle-based supervision. FEDI's current role includes a significant focus on orderly growth and development of forex markets through regular engagement with the regulators, other statutory and trade bodies, capacity building by providing training to officers of its members. At times, when as recently reiterated by IMF, overall risks to economic prospects have increased and policy trade-offs have become more complex, and increasing divergence in economic prospects of countries is a major concern. It is important that we as a nation don't lose the momentum and continue on our path of economic growth that is inclusive and sustainable. To achieve our national aspiration of $5 trillion economy with a $1 trillion merchandise exports, it is important that we as an economy are well integrated with global markets. And that is exactly the theme of this year's FEDI Annual Day. We have also lined up interesting and enriching discussion on another topic, which has become hot in financial markets, digital currencies, or to be very specific, central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. So in this background, this FEDI 5th Annual Day assumes even more significance. And I, as chairman of FEDI, am very, very happy to welcome you all to this 5th FEDI Annual Day today. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, sir. Thank you for your message and for warmly welcoming our dignitaries and participants. Dear attendees, it is now my inestimable pleasure to initiate the highly significant keynote address of the day and welcome our honorable chief guest. And our distinguished chief guest of the day and keynote speaker is Mr. T. Ravi Shankar, Honorable Deputy Governor, the Reserve Bank of India, our regulator. Before DG sir commences his message with our audience, it would be a pleasure for me to read a few lines about sir's illustrious credentials as a distinguished regulator. Shri Ravi Shankar took over as the Deputy Governor of RBI in May 2021. Sir was Executive Director of the Reserve Bank before being elevated to this post. A career central banker, he joined the bank in 1990 and has worked in various positions within the bank. As Executive Director, he was looking after the Department of Payment and Settlement Systems, the Department of Information Technology, FinTech, and the Risk Monitoring Departments. His areas of expertise include exchange rate management, reserves portfolio, public debt management, monetary operations and development, regulation and surveillance of financial markets, payment systems, and IT infrastructure. Sir has served as an IMF consultant between 2005 to 2011 on developing government bond markets and debt management. He represented RBI on international forums like Bank for International Settlements and various internal and external expert committees and working groups. In addition to his professional career at RBI, he is chairman, Indian Financial Technology and Allied Services, IFTAS. He is also chairman and also on the member of Board of Directors, REBIT, and member of Governing Council of IDRBT. Sir holds a Master's of Philosophy in Economics from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Bhatia, Mr. Ajay Sinha, Mr. Sindwani. I'm really grateful for being invited for this keynote address to the 5th FEDAI Annual Day. I also see that further down the program there is a discussion on CBDCs, which is a very relevant and hot topic. There are some very very active debates going on on CBDCs globally. I'm sure India will play a role in contributing to that debate, and the session that follows on that hopefully is really very useful. What I propose to do in this address is as below. In the previous FEDAI Annual Day address in November 2020, Governor Das had observed that capital account convertibility will continue to be approached as a process rather than an event. Now, what I will do in this address is to expand on that theme and bring into focus some of the important issues on which, in my opinion, further public debate is warranted to continue along this process of capital account convertibility. Probably it's a good idea to start off with the basics. It always is. So I will do the same thing here. First of all, what is capital account convertibility? For that, we have to get back to the balance of payments. The balance of payments of a country records all economic transactions of that country, its individuals, businesses, governments, with the rest of the world during a defined period, usually 1 year. Now, these transactions are broadly divided into under two heads, current account and capital account. The current account covers exports and imports of goods and services, factor income, and unilateral transfers. The capital account records the net change in foreign assets and liabilities held by the country. Now, convertibility refers to the ability to convert domestic currency into foreign currency and vice versa to make payments for balance of payment transactions. That is the very general definition of convertibility. Now, current account convertibility in that context would be the ability or freedom to convert domestic currency for current account transactions, while capital account convertibility would be to convert domestic currency into foreign currencies and vice versa for capital account transactions. Definitions therefore vary depending on from which angle you look at it. The Tarapur Committee, for instance, defined capital account convertibility as the freedom to convert local financial assets into foreign financial assets and vice versa. That's as succinct a definition as any. The degree of balance of payments convertibility of a country usually depends on the level of its economic development and degree of maturity of its financial markets. Therefore, in very general terms, advanced economies are very close to being fully convertible. Some of them are fully convertible, while emerging economies are convertible to different degrees. Now, let us look at the question of why is capital account convertibility important from an economic policy point of view. Now, free capital mobility or internationalization of capital markets is commonly recognized as an engine of global growth. Specifically, benefits of internationalization of capital markets is well accepted in terms of broadening the investor base for recipient country financial assets, improved liquidity in financial markets, and positive pressures for market infrastructure and market practices. International capital markets, by enabling access to a global saving pool and to different currencies, can potentially reduce borrowing costs, facilitate better risk allocation, and enhance global liquidity. What are the risks of free capital mobility and how are these risks to be managed? The various currency and banking crises that we have experienced, starting mostly in the debt crisis of the Latin American debt crisis in the 80s, right down to the Asian crisis in the late 90s and then further on. These crises experienced over the last few decades have highlighted the costs and risks of internationalization, such as exposure to global shocks, credit and asset bubbles, exchange rate volatility associated with sudden exit of capital, and higher refinancing risk. Increased globalization has brought to the fore the vulnerability to contagion effects. While it was argued that such risks are the short-term pains needed to reap long-term gains, there is now a wider acceptance that benefits of internationalization are not an unmixed blessing, and that there is a nuanced trade-off between growth and crisis risk. Such awareness has led to policy focus on broadly three fronts. First, that benefits of internationalization presupposes sound macroeconomic fundamentals, a well-developed financial system, and sound market infrastructure, including efficient markets for funding and risk transfer. Second, that countries need to develop appropriate tools to deal with the risks of internationalization. In particular, tools to manage the volume and composition of capital inflows and macroprudential tools. And third, that different types of capital flows carry different risks. Some are more risky than others. The agreed hierarchy of capital flows is that foreign direct investment is the least risky, followed by equity investment, followed by debt capital. By investment, I mean inflows. Now, while FDI is seen to contribute to long-term growth, portfolio equity gives a shorter-term boost. Debt flows, while necessary, are also susceptible to be volatile. Understandably, the focus of capital flow regulations and macroprudential regulations has been debt flows. Let's look at what capital flow regulations are and what macroprudential regulations are. Capital flow measures are effective insofar as they lead to safer external liability structure by reducing dependence on foreign borrowing through, let's say, country caps, macro caps on FPI inflows, for example, and they could be particularly effective during sudden stop episodes. They work essentially by avoiding risky flows or containing short-term debt or controlling currency exposure of domestic borrowers. Especially for economies where capital flows are relatively large or the exposure of banking systems is significant, these measures could be more effective than macroprudential tools. Macroprudential measures target systemic stability issues and tend to be capital-based or liquidity-based or borrower-based. Capital-based measures like countercyclical capital buffers or higher than standard capital requirements or calibration of capital risk weights intended to change incentives for certain types of funding are commonly used. Liquidity coverage ratio or net stable funding ratio can be used to manage exposure to short-term flows. Similarly, credit or asset bubbles can be controlled using loan-to-value ratios or debt service to income ratios. Now, there is extensive global discussion on the choices and effectiveness of these tools to deal with specific vulnerabilities. There is reasonable consensus that none of these measures is undesirable in itself. There is also broad agreement on the sequencing of these measures, that the first line of defense against risks of capital flows are prudent macroeconomic policies and a strong institutional base. External borrowing should be controlled until corporate governance and supervisory standards are robust. Now, this is the understanding, this is the way global thinking on capital mobility has evolved, but not all emerging markets, however, may have this choice and may be constrained to depend on capital flows either to meet their investment needs or to develop financial markets. For many of these countries, the required development of policy and markets has to happen simultaneously with dependence on foreign capital. Often, there is only a limited choice on the type of capital that flows in, leading to dependence on risky debt capital. Managing these cap flows with a not so efficient domestic institutional base requires policy flexibility. Usually, managing the spillover risks of global capital involves a combination of these and macroprudential tools. Building up reserves can be an acceptable course, especially after the Asian crisis. Many countries have taken to this as an instrument to deal with crisis. Having some control on the amount of debt capital as well as on its nature is another defense. Long-term debt flows could be preferred to short-term flows. Stable investors like pension or insurance funds, reserve portfolios could be preferred to flighty investors such as carry traders and arbitrage traders, etc. In a sense, capital flow measures may really be used to compensate for lack of strong macro fundamentals and adjustment mechanisms. Thus, capital flows are useful and in case of many EMAs, even necessary. The choice is in how to manage the attendant risks. Effective management of these risks, especially those associated with debt flows, requires a diversified policy toolkit. Which of these is used is basically a function of the degree of development of the economy and markets of the country. Let's now come over to capital flow management in India. Now, external sector liberalization started in India with the economic liberalization that commenced in the early 90s, moving to a floating exchange rate regime and freeing up capital account transactions. The enactment of the Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999 codified this arrangement with relatively free capital current account transactions and controlled capital account transactions. Liberalization in this context basically meant gradually freeing up capital account transactions. Over the last 2 decades, FDI has become more or less unrestricted, except for some sectoral caps and restrictions in a few socially sensitive like gambling or volatile flows like real estate or strategic flows like atomic energy sectors. The policy regime for portfolio investments in India commenced in 1992 with the foreign institutional investors, now called foreign portfolio investors, when they were allowed to invest in domestic financial instruments, basically equity at that stage. FPIs were given access to corporate debt markets in 1995 and to government securities in 1997. Thus, the FPI regime has followed the standard process of liberalizing equity flows first and then gradually freeing up debt capital. Apart from sectoral caps to regulate control, portfolio flows into equities in India is virtually unrestricted. Access to debt markets, sovereign and corporate, is however subject to macro caps and other macroprudential limits. These are designed to safeguard domestic economy from excessively speculative hot money flows. There is an effort to liberalize FPI debt flows further with the introduction of the fully accessible route, which places no limit on non-resident investments in specified benchmark securities. Since over time, virtually all securities will fall under the FAR category, the move is unambiguously towards an eventual unfettered access for non-residents into government securities. Efforts to get India included under global bond indexes and the complementary move towards placing G-SECs under global custodians once implemented, will also encourage debt flows in the future. The first this is as far as debt flows are concerned. So what we are basically saying here is that the agreed international hierarchy of FDI has been, FDI and then equity flows and then debt flows. India has broadly followed that trend. FDI is by and large, relatively more free than portfolio flows. Portfolio flows, equity is more free than debt flows. That is the sequence that we have been following. The other debt, foreign debt category that we have in the capital account are external commercial borrowings. The first comprehensive guidelines on external commercial borrowings were issued by government in July 1999. It has been liberalized over time. Currently, ECB by corporates, while more open than portfolio flows, seeks to enable medium to long-term debt, minimum tenor requirements, only healthy corporates to borrow through cost ceilings, subject to an overall soft limit. A few end users, real estate, capital market, equity, etc., are not permitted. If the ECB regime has undergone sequential steps of liberalization, and other than the constraints that I have read out, is fairly free now. If you look at these flows, there is a chart in the presentation, you can see that later. If you look at these flows, one can see that the actual flows of capital have been broadly in the desirable direction, with direct investments outstripping portfolio investments, FPI flows, and equity flows, which is FDI plus FPI equity, outstripping debt flows, which is FPI debt plus ECB. The gradual liberalization of capital inflows has been consistent with the realization of the preferred composition of capital inflows. The focus on capital outflows has understandably been far less, given that India's priority is to attract foreign capital to fund its savings gap. There is basically one channel, overseas direct investment. The liberalized remittance scheme for individuals, while it's open for both current and capital account transactions, is largely more than 90% as per available data in current account transactions like travel, studies, etc. Now, we have covered the basic global thinking on capital flows. We have covered very briefly, of course, the progress and the path that India has taken in terms of capital flows. Now I will move over to some issues that need a wider public debate, and that we will probably have to deal with going forward. The first one is with respect to FPI. With the fully accessible route, as discussed earlier, over time, the entire government securities issuance would be eligible for non-resident investment. While experience of other countries suggests that non-residents are unlikely to hold a major portion of outstanding stock, substantial debt holdings might make India vulnerable to the risk of sudden reversals. Since this channel was permitted in the context of inclusion of India's government securities in global bond indices, there is a natural safety mechanism, as index investors are unlikely to indulge in sudden reversals. It therefore needs to be considered from a macroprudential perspective whether FAR should be linked to index inclusion. That is one point. The second point is that as the LRS scheme has operated for some time, there may be a need to review it, keeping in mind the changing requirements such as higher education requirements for the youth, requirement of startups, etc. There might even be a case for reviewing whether the current limits can remain uniform or can be linked to some economic variable for individuals. A wider public debate on this would probably enable us to review the system for better use and so that it serves the requirements of India's population better. Thirdly, a key aspect of currency convertibility is integration of financial markets. Over time, it is essential that two markets, onshore and offshore, for domestic currency or interest rates cannot exist separately with any degree of efficiency. With increased convertibility, these markets need to be linked. An effort has already commenced in the interest rate derivative segment, allowing Indian banks access to NDF markets for the rupee is also consistent with this objective. As government securities get held by global custodians and traded abroad more and more, and non-residents get to hold rupee assets and take rupee exposure. These measures are already seeing the desired results. For example, the NDF onshore spreads have substantially narrowed after allowing Indian banks access to this space. We need to now consider whether India is ready to allow such non-residents to hold rupee accounts. This will be an important early step in internationalization of the rupee and therefore needs to be carefully considered. Further, there is a need to consider a proper mechanism for information flow so that exchange rate management and interest rate management can continue to be effective in an environment of larger offshore transactions. Finally, as onshore and offshore financial markets get integrated, it should be ensured that price discovery in the domestic markets is efficient, lest flows move to the offshore segment. Take the case of rupee exchange rate. It is market determined with fairly tight bid-ask spreads in the interbank market. Major corporates also seem to be getting fairly tight pricing. Yet many entities, especially SMEs, small exporters, and individuals are prone to overpricing. Now, do processing charges and market risk for warehousing odd lot positions justify these spreads? An effective way to take care of this is to shift price discovery for the retail Forex users to a widely used platform. While such a platform, Forex Retail, has been developed, it appears banks do not find it in their interest to navigate customers to use that platform. In the age of technology, it may not really be possible to shun superior technology for any length of time. There should therefore be a debate on the use of the platform, and banks should make an effort to give it a fair trial. In conclusion, I wish to say that India has come a long way in achieving increasing levels of convertibility on the capital account. It has broadly achieved the desired outcome for the policy choices it has made in terms of achieving a stable composition of foreign inflow. At the same time, India is on the cusp of some fundamental shifts in this space, with increased market integration in the offing and freer non-resident access to debt on the table. The rate of change in capital convertibility will only increase with each of these and similar measures. With that comes the responsibility to ensure that such flows are managed effectively with the right combination of capital flow measures, market prudential measures, and market intervention. All of us need to consider deeply the issues I have highlighted above and arrive at effective solutions. Market participants, particularly banks, will have to prepare themselves to manage the business process changes and the global risks associated with capital convertibility. The regulator's job is somewhat different. As someone once said, the job of a regulator is like that, like the gas regulator in the kitchen. It cannot ensure the quality of the dish, but it can prevent the kitchen from blowing up. The quality of the dish, that is the efficiency with which investment needs of the country are met, is up to how well authorized dealers and other intermediaries in the financial system adjust to the increasingly fuller capital account convertibility. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you indeed, sir. Thank you very much for sparing your valuable time and sharing your critical insights and a very strong message with our constituent members of FEDI here today. So we look forward to more enhanced and stronger interaction with you and other senior RBI officials in the days to follow. We also hope to cordially welcome you to our other events, which will hopefully be in a physical form. Thanks again, sir, and may you have a great day ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Even I look forward to, for more physical meetings. Nothing like eye-to-eye contact for discussing issues, especially vexed issues. I see a lot of people with whom I have discussed extensively the various issues over the years, over a couple of decades. Then there is an immense amount of skill that is there in this audience. Utilizing this skill, we would be able to reach whatever our policy objective is. Thank you. Have a great annual day and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was an engaging and thought-provoking keynote by Deputy Governor RBI, a regulator. And this incidentally brings us to the end of the inaugural session.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will leave. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a great day, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we now embark on session 2 of our event. And to begin with, we move on to another important address of the day, and that is by our guest of honor, Mr. Ashwini Bhatia, Managing Director, State Bank of India, and who has kindly consented to spend some time with us and share his message with fellow professionals from banking and financial services industries. Before Sir takes center stage, I will be pleased to read out a few lines about Sir's professional experiences and his career journey. Mr. Bhatia is currently the Managing Director at State Bank of India, and prior to this, he was the Managing Director and CEO of SBI Funds Management. And before joining SBI Funds, he was working as Chief General Manager Corporate Center in SBI, where he was responsible for revamping the credit structure and processes of the bank. He started his career with State Bank of India in 1985 as a probationary officer. And during his rich 34 years of experience with the bank, he has worked in various states and capacities and has held key positions in the bank, including that of being CGM SME, General Manager, heading retail operations of Haryana, HP Jammu and other states, and various others in network banking, credit, investment banking, and asset management. Sir has wide-ranging experiences in areas like SME, mid-corporate, and Forex, among others. And some of his previous assignments include being CGM, SME, and General Manager Networking on at Chandigarh Circle, and Deputy GM Forex. He has also worked as President and Chief Operating Officer of SBI Capital Markets Limited. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all of you, and greetings to FEDAI on its on your annual day. Greetings on Navratri. I'm speaking on Saraswati Divas, so special greetings to all the participants for that also. So as the Deputy Governor laid out very clearly, the growth of the Forex market and our integration into the global markets, I believe, started in 1991. And from then onwards, there has been no looking back. I'm speaking in a week when the Sensex has become a senior citizen and Nifty has become a teenager. And if you ask me whether I'd like to hold the hand of a teenager or to hold a hand of a senior citizen, I think I'll go with a teenager. That reflects the confidence in the Indian economy. And I think what RBI has done over the past 30 years, from the opening or the economic opening up that happened in 1991, the glide path shown by the Reserve Bank of India, I think all of us need to actually look back and think, that everything has happened so smoothly. So where are we today? I'll just like to take you through that and the opportunities going forward. So India is already considered a leader in information technology and is now considered a pharmacy to the world. The current scenario provides us with massive tailwinds to become a major hub in the global value chain. And we believe that over the next few years, we will get some part of the flows that are moving out of Eastern Asia. By Eastern Asia, of course, I mean China. I think the value of global value chains would be doubling in the next 5 years as far as our economy is concerned, as companies pursue the strategy of China Plus in the aftermath of supply chain disruptions during COVID, as well as the geopolitical developments. In the recent COVID outbreak, we have shown our soft power, and vaccines manufactured by India have contributed immensely in global efforts to vaccinate the whole world. Some of the recent steps taken by India for further integration into the global markets are recent regulatory changes in India's financial markets, focusing on inclusion of our bonds in the global bond indices. Preparations for including India are at an advanced stage. India had till now and was cautious in allowing foreign investments into the debt markets, but recent developments like introduction of fully accessible route and attempts to include debt in global indices indicate India is ready to integrate its financial markets with the world. Equal access to non-residents. In addition, recent regulatory changes by RBI have been aimed at providing equal access for non-residents to Indian forex as well as interest rate derivatives. Almost all restrictions based on residency have been done away with within the recent regulations for forex and interest rate derivatives. The opening up of access to the NDF markets. Reserve Bank has also allowed Indian banks to participate in USD INR NDF markets. And as the Deputy Governor just pointed out, the spreads there have come down sharply. This will allow Indian banks to benefit from arbitrage pricing in the two markets that arises from time to time. In addition, Indian banks have been allowed to offer USD INR quotes through to non-residents throughout the day. The derivatives market has also seen developments. RBI has over the years made significant changes to the derivative markets regulations. Sophisticated non-retail users can now be offered nearly all types of derivative products by banks. This will fill gaps within the Indian financial markets and bring us on par with developed markets. The development of GIFT City in the last few years is another sign that the government really wants to move forward, and the opportunity for India to integrate with global markets without opening up the capital account fully. Large capital investments into startups. This year again, we've seen record flows into the startup ecosystem. We know that there are more than 50 unicorns in India. The flows that have come this year are unprecedented, and they have attracted massive investments from global PE and VC investors. This is a sign of global investment community's confidence in India's growth story and entrepreneurial talent. Participation of foreign investors in equity markets. Again, I need not repeat. This has always been an attractive investment option for foreign investors. Currently, FPIs under various categories have assets under custody worth around 50 lakh crores. That's a huge number. Reserves, of course, what a story it has been, with current reserves of over 630 billion. We are amongst the largest in the world. This provides us confidence that integrating into the global markets will become that much more simpler. On trade, of course, we have not really taken off the way we should, but the tailwinds that we have right now should enable us to move to the 3% mark of global merchandising trade. Clearly, services are leading there. We have the IT services and other services accounting for 3.54% of global trade. For comparisons, India's share in world GDP is only 3.1. So let's at least on a total basis move to 3%. Buyer-driven GVCs. India has massive potential to integrate with GVCs through exports. of traditional buyer-driven networks of labor-intensive goods, including toys, footwear, garments. Examples of these include Walmart, Adidas, Nike, which have actually taken advantage of the whole thing. Producer-driven GVCs. In addition, there are producer-driven GVCs controlled by leading multinationals like Samsung, Apple, LG, etc. These products have fragmented productions across many countries. Each country specializes in one or more fragments of the process, with final sophisticated parts and components produced in capital and skill-intensive countries, and final assembly done in developing low-skilled, labor-intensive countries like China and Vietnam. The high-value R&D and design work is usually done in the US, South Korea, or Japan. Initially, India may need to compete with China and Vietnam for labor-intensive parts of such GVCs, while continuously investing in its universities, colleges, and research and development capabilities to slowly start competing for the higher end of the value chain. Recent steps taken by the government. India has a large pool of engineers and English-speaking population that provide us with an advantage for integrating within the global value chains. Our labor costs are half of those in China, making India suitable for labor-intensive manufacturing like textiles, garments. In India, if India provides a large domestic market, which it actually does, the major incentive to set up manufacturing is very much there. A lot of stress is being placed by the government to develop India's manufacturing base by addressing competitive shortcomings, the implementation of GST being one step. India has also made progress in electricity generation. The total generation increased from 1,000 terawatt hours to 1,600 terawatt hours in 2017. This is a comparison from 2010 to 2017. And the Bharatmala and Sagarmala projects are aimed at addressing issues relating to logistics in infrastructure. India is also looking to actively sign FTAs with developed countries. India-UK early harvest trade is likely to be signed on the 1st of November, with a full FTA agreement next year. Similarly, an FTA with Australia is likely to be finalized by the end of 2022. These FTAs will likely reduce the competitive disadvantage when compared with countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam. To attract investments into manufacturing, government has reduced corporate tax rates, and for new units set up in the manufacturing, a very competitive rate of 15% is provided, in addition to PLI-linked incentives. Both these measures will see enthusiastic response from both domestic and global manufacturing companies. The government yesterday announced the Gati Shakti Master Plan, which will integrate planning, designing, implementation of projects using a digital form. A very significant step, we thought. We are already seeing signs of increased interest in manufacturing in India. Samsung recently completed construction of its manufacturing unit in Noida. Amazon India announced manufacturing electronic products, starting first with Amazon Fire TV stick manufacturing. India is also in talks with Taiwan to set up semiconductor manufacturing in India. Apple has increased its manufacturing in India. In 2018, only 17% of Apple phones were sold in India were manufactured in the country. That number is now at 76. To get a head start in new and upcoming technologies, Indian government is focusing on new technologies, renewable energy, solar cells, EVs. An early start can help India directly insert itself in the high value part of the GVCs in these products. With a GDP of 3.05 trillion, these are the IMF estimates for 2021. India is the world's 6th largest economy and the 3rd largest by purchasing power parity. Given our size, we are underpunching our weight in the global economy. Indian government and regulators like RBI and SEBI have started earnest steps to correct this situation, which is a step to open up the Indian financial markets to non-residents, or the steps being taken to integrate India into the global manufacturing value chains. This year, in the first 5 months itself, our exports have crossed 164. In the last 3 months, we've crossed $100 billion, a massive growth of 67.8% over the previous year. Of course, last year was a COVID, but we are pretty confident that the government's target of 400 billion will be achieved this year itself, aided by iron and steel and other industries. Compared to FY20, our exports have grown 23% in the first 5 months. This is the first time that we will break the range of 300 to 330 billion, where we've been stuck over the last 10 years. But this is not the end goal. The government has set up a target of 1 trillion by 27-28 for merchandise exports and 500 billion exports in the next 2 years. This year, we are aiming for 400. I've already talked about that, which looks eminently achievable at this stage. All these will mean significant opportunity for the Indian forex market to develop various products, both onshore and offshore, for our resident and non-resident customers. I think it is for the members of FIDAI to support this growth. Once again, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity and congratulate FIDAI for so well intermediating between the forex market, the participants, and the regulator. You, as an association, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your warm words. And we want to humbly acknowledge what you said. And thank you for your wonderful message today, sir, and which was interspersed with positive projections about our country and our growth, and most of the enhanced integration of the Indian financial markets. You also spoke about the Indian growth story, and which is so encouraging for all of us sitting here. Thank you very much for your insights and your message today, sir. Have a great day.